I never imagined that my marriage would lead me into a labyrinth of crime. I was just a young bride stepping into a magnificent mansion with the belief that love would bring happiness. But behind each closed door of that house lay dark secrets. A woman in prison forced to feign illness, a child stripped of her family, and a monstrous conspiracy surrounding the death of a wealthy husband. I, an outsider once thought naive, became the sole witness and ally in this battle for survival. And what I uncovered changed everything. Chapter 1. The Hook and the Mysterious Mansion. I still remember that night vividly. The night when my life began to turn down a path I had never imagined. I had just gotten married, still overwhelmed as I stepped into the lavish world of my husband's family. This enormous mansion felt like a palace, with endless hallways, opulent rooms, and an atmosphere that was both luxurious and distant. I thought I had stepped into a dream life, but the truth was far from it. Around 2 a.m, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I decided to head to the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, but on the way I noticed a door I had never paid attention to before. Perhaps it was because the house was so vast that every day I stumbled upon new corners. But this door was different. It didn't fit into the familiar layout I had come to know. Curious, I tried turning the knob. The door opened, and in that instant, my heart nearly stopped. Before me was a dimly lit room, and in the middle stood a long table piled high with cash. Not a few loose bills, not even a few tens of thousands. These were thick bundles of money tied tightly with rubber bands, stacked neatly in rows like something out of a bank vault. Moonlight streamed in through the window, making the $100 bills glisten as if painted in an unreal portrait. I froze my throat dry. Never in my life had I seen so much money in one place. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch one of the stacks. The cold, crisp texture of the paper confirmed it was real, not some movie prop. Hundreds, thousands of bills piled up like a secret treasure. But why here? Why in this hidden room, never mentioned, with no sign of use? I stepped back, slowly trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. Questions hammered inside my head. Where had this money come from? Why wasn't it in a bank? And why was it hidden away in this dark, forbidden room as though it wasn't supposed to exist? Carefully, I closed the door, placing it back exactly as it had been, as if I'd never seen anything at all. But that entire night I couldn't close my eyes. I lay in the vast bedroom, staring up at the ceiling, my mind restless. The next morning, as the family gathered for breakfast, I watched them with new eyes. My mother-in-law, Patricia, draped in a silk robe, lounged lazily in her chair, painting her nails and complaining endlessly about the coffee. My father-in-law, Robert, hid behind his newspaper occasionally, making hushed phone calls filled with cryptic phrases I couldn't decipher. And my sister-in-law, Jessica, was absorbed in online shopping, placing orders without even glancing at the prices. What chilled me was this: none of them seemed to have jobs. No offices, no work schedules. No one ever left the house in the morning. And yet they lived like royalty in this grand mansion, surrounded by the most extravagant luxuries. Where was all the money coming from? While I struggled to piece together the truth they carried on as though nothing was amiss. Patricia flashed a fake smile, telling me I should focus on decorating the living room to prepare for Robert's so-called business meetings. But I had never seen any real business associates, only a few men in suits, arriving at strange hours, leaving quickly without a word to anyone. I told myself I was just being overly sensitive. But then, my gaze fell upon Aunt Margaret, the elderly woman in a wheelchair, sitting silently in the corner. The family claimed her mind was gone, that she was nothing more than a relic forgotten with time. Yet I noticed something different in her eyes. There was clarity, even sharpness, as though she was observing everything. I didn't realize it then, but I had stumbled upon a door I should never have opened. From the moment I laid eyes on those stacks of cash, I understood that this house was not just hiding wealth, it was hiding secrets dark enough to swallow us whole. and I unwittingly had become the one standing at the threshold of a terrifying mystery. Chapter 2. The Strange High Society Family. The next day I looked at everything in the mansion through a different lens. Before, I used to think I was lucky to marry David to step into a wealthy family where I'd never have to worry about money. But after witnessing that room full of cash with my own eyes, the family's luxury began to look like a glossy veneer hiding something much darker beneath. In the days that followed, I started paying closer attention. My father-in-law, Robert, never left the house during working hours. He only sat in his study behind closed doors making phone calls. More than once I caught fragments of his conversations, things like, "The package has arrived safely. The deal is proceeding as planned." It didn't sound like stock trading or real estate at all. My mother-in-law, Patricia, seemed to live in her own world. She often lounged in silk gowns on the sofa until noon, then leisurely headed to the spa or met with her wealthy friends. Her breakfast was never breakfast, but rather a glass of wine accompanied by complaints about the service quality of the maids. And Jessica, my sister-in-law, spent nearly every waking hour shopping online. Piles of designer boxes were delivered to the gate each day, so many that the delivery men had become familiar with every security guard on duty. Watching it all felt bizarre. No one in this family worked, no one had a career, an office, or a daily schedule, yet they spent money as though the flow was infinite. One evening at dinner, I tried to probe subtly. Turning to Robert, I asked as casually as I could, "Dad, what kind of work keeps you so busy? I'm honestly curious." Robert only offered a vague smile before changing the subject. "Oh, just a few investments, nothing you need to worry about. Sarah, you should focus on redecorating the living room. We may be hosting some special guests next week." Patricia jumped in immediately, her smile overly sweet. "That's right, darling. Complicated business matters aren't for you. Think instead about which flowers would look best for the dining table. That's far more important." I forced a smile, but inside I was unsettled. I noticed something else odd. Almost every drawer in the mansion was locked. Robert's desk, Patricia's vanity, even the buffet cabinet in the dining room, all fitted with sophisticated locks, and letters or parcels delivered to the house were never handled by the staff. Robert always collected them personally, disappearing into his study afterward. I began to feel less like a new daughter-in-law and more like an outsider living in the middle of an organization with unspoken rules I couldn't grasp. That feeling only grew stronger whenever I approached Aunt Margaret. She still sat silently in her wheelchair in the corner of the living room. Everyone said her memory was gone, that she lived in her own world, always unable to tell reality from delusion. Patricia often remarked, "Don't bother with Aunt Margaret, Sarah. She's just there like a piece of furniture." But I didn't believe that. I saw her eyes brighten whenever I entered the room. Once, when I smiled gently at her, she nodded ever so slightly, as if to confirm she understood, as if she was still here, far more lucid than they wanted me to think. Jessica hated when I tried to get close to her. Once, when I sat down to talk, Jessica pulled me aside, whispering sharply, "Don't waste your time. She can't say anything. And trust me, asking too many questions is not a good idea in this house." A chill ran down my spine at that warning. Why would she be so concerned? The more I stayed, the more convinced I became that everything they had built, the luxury, the pretense of care, was just a facade. And at the center of it all, Aunt Margaret was the strangest piece, like a silent witness to some secret the entire family was desperate to conceal. I didn't yet know what awaited me, but I felt it clearly. With every passing day in this mansion, I was drawing closer to a truth I might never have been meant to discover. Chapter 3. The Order to Watch Aunt Margaret and the Trip to Greece. That Sunday morning, the whole family sat around the breakfast table as usual. I was still suffocating from everything I had observed when my mother-in-law suddenly dropped a remark, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. "We've decided to take a trip to Greece," she said as she sliced into her croissant her tone light. 3 weeks on the beautiful islands. It will be absolutely wonderful." I looked up, stammering Greece. "When are we leaving?" Robert let out a laugh, low and hollow. "Sarah, you won't be coming. Someone has to stay behind to look after Aunt Margaret. You know she needs care around the clock." The entire room seemed to fall silent. I glanced around the table and saw Jessica, busy fixing her lipstick in a compact mirror, not even bothering to look up. David, my husband, was glued to his phone, completely unbothered. Only Patricia smiled a smile laced with calculation. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. But I've never cared for someone who's ill. If something happens, I don't know if I'll be able to handle it. Jessica let out a sharp little laugh. "Oh, come on. It's not like you'll be doing surgery. Just feed her, give her her pills, and make sure she doesn't hurt herself. Don't make such a big deal out of it." I turned to David, desperate for him to step in on my behalf. But he only lifted his eyes from the screen, staring at me for a moment before speaking in a cold, clipped tone. "Sarah, this is your chance to prove that you're part of this family. Everyone has carried their share of responsibility. Now it's your turn. Taking care of Aunt Margaret is an honor. An honor." The word made my skin crawl. The way he said it didn't sound like a request at all. It sounded like an order. I nodded faintly, but inside a storm was rising. I had the distinct sense that this wasn't some random arrangement. It felt like a test, or worse, a trap. In the days that followed, the mansion buzzed with preparations for the trip. Hallways filled with luxury suitcases, expensive clothes, sent out to be pressed travel documents, meticulously organized. I watched them brimming with excitement for their lavish holiday, while I quietly sat at my computer, researching how to care for a disabled person. More and more I felt isolated, as though they were deliberately pushing me outside the circle of the family. The night before their departure, David suddenly pulled me into the study. His voice was low, but weighted with pressure. "I want you to remember this. Sometimes Margaret says things that aren't real. She thinks people harmed her husband, or that someone's out to kidnap her daughter. All nonsense. If she starts rambling, just nod and change the subject. Whatever you do, don't let her drag you into those stories." I frowned. "What kind of nonsense?" David gripped my shoulders tightly, his eyes dark. "Sick delusions. All you need to do is keep her quiet and comfortable. That's it." I bit my lip, my heartbeat racing. His warning didn't reassure me, it unsettled me even more. Why did he have to emphasize it so strongly? The next morning, the family left in a convoy of sleek black cars bound for the airport. I stood at the doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the distance, suddenly realizing the massive house was now only occupied by me and Aunt Margaret. Silence blanketed every corner, a silence so heavy it made me shiver. In that moment, I sensed that the next 3 weeks would change my life forever. And I was right. It all began the moment I heard Aunt Margaret call my name in a voice I never imagined I would hear. Chapter 4. Margaret Stands Up and the Shocking Revelation. The first 2 days after the family left for Greece, I lived in the mansion as though it had been abandoned. Every room remained luxurious and grand, but the silence made me uneasy rather than comfortable. I tried to follow their instructions, cook for Aunt Margaret, wheel her out to the balcony for sunlight, give her medicine on time. I began to notice that her gaze was nothing like the vacant look everyone claimed. She watched me closely when I prepared meals, when I swept the floor, when I walked down the hall. Those eyes were too sharp, too alert to belong to someone whose mind was gone. I didn't dare believe it until that afternoon. I had taken her into the glass room for afternoon tea. The late sun streamed through tall windows, bathing the room in a golden glow. I was pouring tea when I suddenly heard her voice, clear, steady, not the least bit shaky. "Sarah." "How long have they been gone?" I nearly dropped the teapot. I turned, staring straight into her eyes. Never before had I heard her speak a coherent sentence. Trembling, I answered, 2 days now. They'll be gone for about 3 weeks. She nodded slowly, then suddenly pressed her hands against the armrest. Before my eyes, the woman I thought would be confined to a wheelchair forever began to rise, No wobbling, no trembling. She stood firm as though she had been practicing for years. I froze, my heart pounding wildly. "Aunt, what's happening? They said you couldn't walk anymore." Margaret locked her gaze on me, her voice firm. "Sarah, they've lied to everyone. I am not paralyzed. They drugged me, kept me weak and helpless. I've had to pretend all this time, 2 years, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment has come." I staggered back, my mind spinning. Why would they do that? Her eyes flickered with pain, but also with unshakable resolve. "My husband Harold did not die of heart failure, as they told you. They poisoned him bit by bit until his heart gave out. Also, they could seize his wealth and the company he spent his life building." The words slashed through the still air like a knife. My voice broke. "No, that can't be true," she continued, her voice thick with grief, but still unwavering. "That's not all. They took my daughter, too. Emma, she was only 11. They told everyone she ran away, that she was troubled. But the truth is, they locked her away in what they called a boarding school, just to erase her from my life. Sarah, they stole everything from me." I collapsed into a chair, clutching my head. Suddenly all the pieces began to fit the fear in her eyes, the family's evasive answers, the hidden room full of cash. It all made sense. Margaret stepped closer, her cold yet strong hand pressing onto my shoulder. "You were the only one who saw me as a real person. You didn't turn away like they did. I trust you, and I need you." I looked up, my lips trembling. "What do you want me to do?" Her eyes shone, her faith in me unmistakable. "Help me bring Emma back. She's still alive, I know it. I've left signs so she knows I'm here. If she comes, you must stand with me to protect her before they return." In the room flooded with golden evening light, I stared at the woman I had thought crippled just days ago, now standing tall, fierce, and proud before me. I knew then there was no turning back. I was entangled in a secret that could destroy my husband's entire family. And, indeed, only a few hours later, when a faint knock echoed from the garden gate, I realized Margaret's words weren't just born of fear. They were the truth. And that truth was about to walk straight into my life. Chapter 5. Emma Appears and the Reunion. The knock at the garden gate was faint, so soft, it seemed like someone didn't want to be noticed. I glanced at Aunt Margaret and saw her whole body, tense, her eyes widening, glowing with a mixture of hope and fear. She whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. "It's her, Sarah, that's Emma." My heart tightened. I had never seen her so shaken. We hurried toward the back door, crossing the vast garden. The fading light of dusk cloaked everything in a silence that felt heavy with tension. And then I saw her, a small figure standing outside the iron gate, a thin girl with messy black hair, clothes far too big for her fragile frame. In her arms she clutched an old fabric bag as if it were a treasure. But what stunned me most were her eyes, clear, bright, intelligent, the mirror image of Margaret's. When the gate swung open, the girl uttered a single word, choked with sobs. "Mama." Margaret lunged forward, collapsing to the ground, wrapping her daughter in her arms as though afraid she would vanish. Mother and daughter wept together, the sound raw, agonizing, and yet freeing. I stood, frozen, tears streaming down my face. "My child, my brave girl Margaret," whispered, kissing her tangled hair. "I never abandoned you. I was always here waiting for you to come back." Emma clung to her mother, trembling. Her voice broke into fragments. "They told me you were very sick, that you couldn't remember anything. They said you didn't want me anymore. But I knew they were lying. I always believed you were still waiting for me." I stepped closer, my chest aching at those words. An 11-year-old child, forced to carry such loneliness, locked away in a place they called a school, robbed of her real family. Margaret introduced me to Emma, her hand squeezing mine as a silent thank you. "This is Sarah. It's thanks to her that we are together today." The girl looked at me warily, but after a moment, innocence outweighed suspicion. She gave a small nod, whispering, Thank you for not leaving my mother." We brought Emma inside. I prepared a simple meal, and I watched her eat ravenously, as though she hadn't had a full meal in days. Each bite of bread, each spoonful of soup pierced my heart. A child who should have been cherished in this mansion had instead been abandoned in a strange place, forced to live in deprivation and lies. After the meal, Margaret pulled an old photograph from her pocket, Harold, her husband. She placed it before her daughter. Emma touched his face in the photo, her eyes filling with tears. They said he died of heart disease. But I know. Something wasn't right. I remember him being so strong. Margaret held her close, her voice sinking low. "You're not wrong, Emma. He was poisoned. They took your father from us, then tried to take you from me too. But now we will never let them do it again." I watched the two cling to each other, my chest heavy with both emotion and dread. I knew from this moment that I was no longer merely a daughter-in-law. I was caught in a war from which there was no escape. I had heard enough to know my husband's family wasn't just cruel, but dangerous. Yet when Emma lifted her gaze to me, her young eyes shining with trust and hope, I knew I couldn't turn away. I was no longer just an outsider. I had become a witness, an ally, and perhaps their last refuge. That night, as Margaret and Emma fell asleep together on the same bed, I sat by the window, staring into the pitch-dark garden. I knew one thing for certain: when my in-laws returned, they would not forgive. And before that happened, we would have to find a way to expose the truth. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Study and the Evidence. The next morning, before sunlight could pierce through the tall windows, Margaret called Emma and me over. Her eyes glowed with a kind of energy I had never seen in her before. "It's time," she said softly. "You must see everything I've hidden, so you'll understand why I am certain of the truth." She led us into Robert's study, a room I had never been allowed to enter. The heavy wooden door was firmly shut, but Margaret went straight to the massive bookshelf, pulling gently on a few volumes at the bottom corner. I heard a faint click. Then the entire section of shelving slid sideways, revealing a hidden compartment. I held my breath. The sight before me made my skin prickle. Thick folders, stacks of yellow documents, and old photographs tucked away inside. Margaret carefully laid them out on the desk. "This is Harold's true will," she said, handing me a slightly crumpled packet. "It states that all assets, the company, everything would belong to Emma once she turns 18. I was only named guardian. But right after Harold's death, another will appeared, a forged one that transferred everything into Patricia and Robert's hands. I flipped through the pages. Even to my untrained eyes, the discrepancies were obvious: a signature that looked unnatural, ink that didn't match, dates that contradicted each other. Margaret went on, her voice trembling but firm. I secretly recorded them. Before they dosed me with more drugs, I planted a recorder in the living room. She pulled out a small, battered tape recorder. When she pressed play, Robert's voice emerged smooth and cold. "The old man's finally gone. The heart medication worked better than expected. Now all that's left is the girl." Then came Jessica's voice light, as though she were discussing shopping. "The boarding school will keep her quiet. No one believes a child who's lost her father and mother." I gripped the armrest of my chair, a chill sweeping through my body. But what pierced me most was the sound of David's voice, the husband I had trusted. "Don't worry. Sarah suspects nothing. She's too naive, too easy to control. Once everything settles, we'll deal with her too." I went numb. My heart clenched as though crushed in a fist. So that was all I was to him, a pawn. A tool to maintain their polished image of a decent family. And when I no longer served my purpose, I would vanish just like Harold, just like Emma. Margaret placed her hand on my shoulder, her tone grave. "Sarah, I know this is hard to accept, but you must stay clear-headed. You are no longer safe here. We only have each other now, you, me, and Emma. If they return, all three of us will be in danger." Emma nestled close to her mother, her wide eyes fixed on me, as if waiting for my answer. I looked at them both, my heart in turmoil. Part of me wanted to run to leave the house to pretend I had never heard the truth. But then I remembered Emma's desperate eyes at the garden gate and those contemptuous words on the recording. I drew in a deep breath. We won't give up. We'll bring the truth to light. They think I'm naive, think I'm just an outsider. But that's exactly why I'll be the one they never see coming. Margaret nodded, her eyes shining with the trust she had kept hidden for 2 long years. Emma's small hand slipped into mine, warm and steady. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the study, staring at the folders and the recorder laid out before me, my chest swelling with a resolve I had never known. They had called me useless, easy to control knave. But in that moment, I knew I would never let myself be a victim again. I would stand with Margaret and Emma. And this time, when that family returned from Greece, they would not meet the weak Sarah they thought they knew. They would face a Sarah who had seen through everything. Chapter 7. The Escape and the Pursuit of Justice. After hearing the recordings and seeing the forged documents with my own eyes, I knew we couldn't stay in that house another day. It felt as though every wall, every door was whispering the family's wicked schemes. I imagined them returning to find Margaret alert to discover Emma back in her mother's arms, and I shuddered. They would not hesitate to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. The next morning, I rose early. I packed a simple change of clothes for Emma and gathered a few essentials for Margaret. She understood my plan instantly, with just a look. When Emma asked innocently, "Where are we going?" I crouched down and whispered, "To find people who can protect us." We dared not use the front entrance. I knew this family had enough connections to silence neighbors, even security patrols if something happened. So the 3 of us slipped quietly through the back door, following a narrow path toward the side gate. I ordered a taxi from my phone, instructing it to meet us 2 blocks away from the mansion. When the taxi pulled up, my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. Margaret wore sunglasses and a scarf pulled low over her head. Emma nestled close to her mother, while I pressed my lips together, resisting the urge to look back. The driver chatted casually about traffic and weather, unaware he was ferrying 3 fugitives fleeing from a nest of crime. We headed straight to the central police headquarters in the city, not the local precinct. Margaret insisted Robert has ties here. No one in the neighborhood station would dare cross him. Only the central office will be neutral. As we stepped inside the station, my palms were slick with sweat, but Margaret was composed. She placed the folder of documents and the tape recorder on the desk, her voice firm. "I'm here to report murder, fraud, and the abduction of a child." At first the officer looked doubtful, but after glancing through the papers and hearing a few snippets of the recordings, his demeanor changed. He immediately led us into a private room and called for the detective on duty. I will never forget her name. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp woman with eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever sat before her. She spread out the documents and listened intently as Margaret recounted everything. Emma sat beside her mother, occasionally adding small details about the school where she had been confined. I sat there trembling between fear and relief. For the first time, we weren't alone. When the interview ended, Detective Santos said, "What you've brought us is enough to launch a major investigation. But first, I need to ensure the safety of all 3 of you. That family will surely realize you've disappeared." That very evening, we were relocated to a safe apartment in the city. It wasn't luxurious or comfortable, but it was clean, and officers stood guard outside. Emma clung to her mother, whispering, "For the first time, I feel truly safe." But I knew this safety was temporary. My husband's family was wealthy, powerful, and accustomed to covering their tracks. They would not let go so easily. That night, lying on an unfamiliar bed, I listened to the steady breathing of Margaret and Emma in the next room. In my mind, one line from the recording echoed endlessly. "Sarah suspects nothing. Once it's done, we'll get rid of her." They had already written me off as a disposable pawn, but I swore from that moment forward I would not be their victim. I would fight for Emma, for Margaret, and for myself, because justice had begun to move, and this time they would pay. Chapter 8. The Expanding Investigation. The following days in the safe house passed slowly, but under constant tension. We were instructed to stay indoors as much as possible, communicating only through the police. Detective Santos visited often, bringing fresh updates. Each time she arrived, I felt both anxious and hopeful, as if waiting for a verdict on my very life. We verified the will, Santos said one morning while Emma sat at the table coloring. Harold's signature on the original matches perfectly with the bank records and business contracts. The forged version is riddled with shaky strokes and discrepancies in every detail. There's no longer any doubt. Margaret squeezed my hand tightly. She had waited 2 long years to hear that confirmation, but that was only the beginning. Santos revealed that they had traced enormous transfers of money from Harold's company into secret accounts, most of them under the names of Robert's and Patricia's relatives. Piece by piece, the evidence was forming a larger picture, a calculated, ruthless conspiracy to seize everything. What chilled me most was when Santos added, several former employees have agreed to testify. The former housekeeper, the butler, even the gardener. All of them spoke of Margaret being forced to take medication, Harold's sudden death, and Emma's mysterious disappearance. They kept silent out of fear, but now it's different. For the first time, I saw a genuine spark of hope. No longer just Margaret's word or the hidden recordings. Now there were witnesses, documents, and money trails all converging into undeniable proof. But with hope came a new fear. Santos warned us the family has begun to sense something is wrong. We have reports that they're asking questions looking for you 3. They suspect but don't yet know where you are. You must remain absolutely discreet. At those words, Emma pressed close against me. I wrapped my arms around her, my heart racing. I knew that if they ever found us, it could all end in tragedy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the small window staring down at the empty street. Memories of the mansion returned, the hollow family dinners, the veiled remarks, and David's cold eyes. I remembered his voice on the recording. Once everything settles, we'll get rid of her. Never before had a single sentence killed love so completely inside me. Margaret came out of her room and saw me sitting quietly. She sat beside me and whispered, "Sarah, you can walk away from all of this. You don't owe us anything. You're young, you can start over." I shook my head, hot tears slipping down my cheeks. "No, Aunt. If I leave now, it means they win. I've been weak before, I've turned a blind eye before. But this time, I want to see them punished with my own eyes." She laid her hand gently over mine, her gaze filled with both sorrow and pride. "Then we'll see it through together." The next day, the police escorted us to meet the prosecutor's lawyer. I saw thick folders stacked high on the table, all centered on the Harrison family. Each piece of evidence, each testimony was like the final nails sealing the coffin of their freedom. But I knew that, before justice could be carried out, storms still lay ahead. That family would never surrender easily, and deep down I felt it when they returned from Greece. The real storm would begin. Chapter 9. The return and the shock at the airport. Their return came sooner than I expected. For a week I had lived in the safe house, following the news every day, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally erupt. Detective Santos assured us that all the paperwork was complete, the arrest warrants signed. All that remained was for them to set foot on the ground and the police would act. That afternoon, I sat with Emma curled against me on the sofa, trying to soothe her, even as my own heart raced. At 3:30, Sharp Santos received a call. She nodded firmly. "The plane has landed. Get ready." I stood by the window, my eyes glued to my phone screen, as the news broadcast showed live footage from the airport. The Harrison family emerged radiant after their Greek vacation. Patricia wore a long white dress and oversized sunglasses, strutting like a queen. Robert strolled leisurely with his suitcase, smiling and chatting. Jessica was glued to her phone, oblivious to the world around her. And David, my husband, walked at their center, his expression cold, his demeanor utterly untroubled. For a few moments it felt as if my heart was being crushed. I had once loved that man, once believed he was my safe harbor. Now watching him stride through the crowd as though innocent of any crime, I felt ice seep through my veins. Then it happened. From every direction, officers surged forward. Dark blue jackets surrounded them as voices rang out, "Robert Harrison, Patricia. Harrison, you are under arrest for murder, fraud, and child abduction." The scene played out like a movie. Patricia's mouth fell open, her sunglasses dropping to the floor. Robert tried to appear calm, but his hands trembled. Jessica burst into tears, struggling as handcuffs snapped around her wrists. And David? He froze, his face pale. His eyes darted desperately, searching for an escape, but there was none. When the cuffs finally locked onto his wrists, I realized it was the first time in his life he had truly looked afraid. The live broadcast captured every second. Bystanders stopped to stare, some even filming on their phones. A family once cloaked in power and luxury now stood exposed as criminals. Watching it unfold on the screen, I felt something strange. Not triumph, not joy, just a profound, quiet relief. At last, the truth was undeniable. Emma tugged at me, whispering, They won't take me away anymore, will they?" I pulled her close, my voice trembling but firm. "No, Emma. From now on, no one can hurt you again. They've lost." By evening, the headlines dominated every paper. Harrison family accused of murder and inheritance fraud. Dark secrets behind a wealthy mansion. My name appeared too, not as a victim, but as the young wife who bravely helped bring the truth to light. My phone buzzed nonstop. Relatives, old friends, even former co-workers called, some shocked, some judgmental. But this time I let none of it weigh on me. I had chosen my side, the side of truth. That night, as the television replayed the footage of the Harrisons being led away, I sat beside Margaret. She clasped my hand, her voice warm but steady. "Sarah, you saved us. Without you, Emma and I might never have lived to see this day." I shook my head, glancing at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "No, Aunt. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known. Emma, braver than any child should have to be. I simply chose to stand where justice demanded." Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. And in that moment, I knew the battle wasn't over. The trial still lay ahead, and justice still had a long road to travel. But at least the gates of hell had closed behind us, and for the first time in months, I felt truly free. Chapter 10. The Trial and Final Liberation. The day of the trial came sooner than I thought. The courtroom was packed, the press swarming outside, all eager to witness the downfall of the Harrison family. I sat between Margaret and Emma, our hands tightly entwined. Looking toward the defendants, I saw faces that had once been so familiar, but now felt like strangers. Patricia no longer looked like the powerful matriarch. Her face was gaunt, her eyes stripped of their arrogance. Robert still tried to appear composed, but his hands trembled whenever evidence was presented. Jessica kept her head bowed, her hair hanging over her face. And David. He sat upright, but his eyes were vacant, his arrogance gone. The prosecutor began with the recordings. Robert's voice filled the courtroom. The heart medication worked better than expected. "Now, all that's left is the girl." Then Jessica's voice. "The boarding school will keep her quiet." And then David's voice. "My husband, Sarah, suspects nothing. Once it's done, we'll get rid of her." I closed my eyes. Hearing those words again, this time in front of everyone, sent a chill through me, but also relief. Now the whole world could hear, not just me. Margaret was called to the stand. She described in detail how she had been drugged, forced to feign disability, all while secretly gathering evidence. Her voice quivered, but each word cut sharp. When she recounted the moment Emma appeared at the garden gate, the entire courtroom fell silent. I saw many in the audience wipe away tears. Then Emma took the stand, trembling as she walked. Though only 11, she spoke clearly about her days locked away in the so-called school, about how they told her mother was dead. Her pure, small voice echoed through the chamber, silencing everyone. Even the judge lowered his head for a brief moment before continuing. Then it was my turn. I rose my hand, slightly shaking, but my heart resolute. I told them about my first days in the mansion, about the hidden room of cash I stumbled upon, about the strange looks and the task they gave me to watch over a woman they thought harmless. I spoke of the betrayal I felt hearing David's voice on that tape, reducing me to nothing but a disposable pawn. At last I looked directly into his eyes and declared, "You called me naive, easy to control. But by trusting the truth, I brought everything into the light. And today, justice is no longer on your side." When I returned to my seat, Emma squeezed my hand tight. She whispered, "You did great." Finally, after hours of testimony and argument, the judge read the verdict. His voice thundered through the courtroom: Patricia and Robert, life in prison. Jessica, 25 years. And David, 30 years behind bars, convicted of fraud and conspiracy to murder. I drew in a long, deep breath. The weight that had crushed my chest for so long lifted at last. Not joy, not triumph, just release, an ending. When we stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight was dazzling, brighter than I had ever seen it. Margaret wrapped her arms around Emma, and I walked beside them, my heart swelling with something I had long forgotten: peace. Margaret turned to me, her voice choked but proud. "Sarah, we won. But more importantly, we survived. From now on, we are free." I looked at Emma's radiant smile in the sunlight, then at my own trembling hands. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but at least the past was behind us. And this time, I was no longer the weak figure in someone else's story. I had rewritten the story of my own life. When the courtroom doors closed, I realized that justice is not only found in verdicts, but also in freedom of the soul. The Harrison family once believed they could bury their crimes beneath wealth and power, but in the end, the truth prevailed. Margaret reclaimed her daughter. Emma found her mother again. And I found myself. From a woman once dismissed and underestimated, I rose, fought, and helped shape an ending they never could have foreseen. Perhaps the greatest revenge is not hatred, but the chance to go on living a life of peace, freedom, and light, something they will never be able to touch.